culture is. So as we look at it, culture is very often a big buzzword in business today. Yet at the same time, the reality is that people talk about culture, but without actually ever taking the time to define it. There are quite a few definitions that are floating around in the market, and they can be simple to fairly complex. There is one in particular that I have found that I think is very succinct and extremely easy to get your head around. So we're going to look at that first, and then we're going to look at why culture is important and what maybe you can do to start to shape your culture in your respective organization. So the definition that I like to use is one that is in a book by Carolyn Taylor, and it is referred to or described as the patterns of behavior that are encouraged, discouraged, and tolerated by people and systems over time. Now, what's important in this definition is the following. First of all, we are obviously talking about behaviors, and it is specifically patterns of behavior. So it is not an individual behavior, but it is the patterns of behavior that you see across a group, a subgroup, or a team. And then it's about the behaviors that are encouraged, discouraged, or tolerated. Now, in any organization, it's relatively straightforward to identify the behaviors that are encouraged. You, in your business, might encourage people to be, respectful, friendly. It's also easy to identify the behaviors that you want to discourage. So it's, being rude or being disrespectful of others. But what's really, in my view, one of the most critical elements of this are the behaviors that are tolerated by people and systems. Now, what I mean by this is over the years, when you think about it, you will see that your behaviors in your organization have almost taken on a life of their own. And many of those may be behaviors that you don't like or don't want. But for whatever reason, no one at any level of the organization has actually taken the time to say, we don't like those behaviors. So when you don't do that, you are basically tolerating those behaviors. And by doing that, they become de facto part of your culture. Now, it is those tolerated behaviors that can be very difficult to eradicate in your organization over time because they become really implicit. They become part of your DNA, even though you didn't want them to. And the last element of this definition that is really important is this idea of time. Behavior is not created or shaped in one day or 1 week. It's done through events over a period of years in your organization. And that is something that makes it therefore difficult to change. And we recognize that. Those of us who work in culture know that if you want to change behaviors in your organization, it doesn't happen in a week or 2 weeks. It takes depending on the size of your organization, anywhere from 6 to 18 months or more. So let's now look at one of the aspects of culture versus strategy. Culture is, as I said, in my view, absolutely critical to the success of your organization. Culture expresses your goals through values and beliefs. Strategy, on the other hand, offers a formal logic. Your strategy relies on plans and sets of choices, and leadership goes hand in hand with strategy. But leaders are absolutely critical in setting the culture. And when we look at culture, these are activities that are guided by shared beliefs and group norms. As I mentioned just a minute ago in the definition, it is about these patterns of behavior that are shared across a group over time. Now, strategy and culture are different sides of the same coin. They are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. Whether you consciously shape your culture or not, the reality is you have a culture. It may not be the one you want. It may not be the one that you set out to create, but you have it. And therefore, since it is something that you have, whether you want it or not, why not manage it and shape it in the way that is going to be the best outcome for your organization? Now, when we look at culture, there are 4 aspects to it. As I mentioned, it is a group phenomena. It relies on shared behaviors, values, and norms. It is about the unwritten rules. But secondly, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. It's behaviors, your physical environment, rituals, symbols. Do you do a Christmas party? Do you do a summer party? What kind of dress code do you enforce? All of that sets the tone for your organization. Thirdly, culture endures. It's developed through critical events over time. And as part of that time element, it will attract people to your organization. You will select people that most likely fit in with your culture, and there will also be a natural attrition. There will be people who join who don't feel comfortable with it, and therefore they will leave. And that is not a bad thing. People automatically tend to assume that turnover is bad. It's not, as long as you're getting or losing the people that are not fitting in with your bigger plan. And fourthly, it is implicit. And what we mean by that is that people react to it instinctively. They can't necessarily feel it, they can't necessarily describe it or put their finger on it, but they feel it. And it is deep under their skin. And if they feel akin to it, they will thrive. If they feel it goes against their own personal values, they will eventually choose to either adapt or leave your organization. Now, when we look at culture, a lot of studies have been done on this, and the reality is that there are many different models out there. The one that I particularly like is what I'm going to show you now, which was developed by Spencer Stuart some years ago, a couple years ago actually, where they classify the types of culture into 8 categories. So what we see here is there are 2 axes here. You have on the top, flexibility, so how flexible is your organization to change? How stable is your organization? How do people respond to change? And then on the x-axis, it's about independence versus interdependence. How do your people interact with each other? Looking at across those 2 axes, or depending how you look at it, 4 axes to be honest, what we see is they've identified 2 types of culture within each quadrant. Now, caring, I'll go through these briefly with you. For those of you who are interested in more, please get in touch with us, and we're happy to have a separate conversation, go into it in more detail. But let me just give you an overview and then ask you to think about what type of organization is yours. Where do you fall on these quadrants? So if we look at caring, it focuses on relationships and mutual trust. Work environments tend to be warm, collaborative, and welcoming places where people help and support one another. Employees tend to be united by loyalty, and leaders emphasize sincerity and teamwork. Purpose, on the other hand, is exemplified by idealism and altruism. Purpose is a big buzzword right now, and it is getting a lot of attention around the world in all sorts of different organizations. But in this particular purpose-driven organization, and one could argue that most organizations are purpose-driven, but that is a separate discussion, work environments are tolerant and compassionate places. People try to do good for the long-term future of the world. People are united by a focus on sustainability and global communities. Learning, on the other hand, is characterized by exploration, expansiveness, innovation, creativity. It is about promoting innovation in your organization. It's about having an open-minded place where people spark new ideas. Enjoyment is expressed through fun and excitement. What this means really is that work environments are more lighthearted. People tend to do what makes them happy. I think Virgin Atlantic in its heyday at the beginning could perhaps fall into this category, or perhaps even Google or Apple earlier on in their history. Results, on the other hand, results organizations are characterized by achievement and winning. It's all about being outcome-oriented, merit-based. People want to achieve, and there is a drive for capability and success. Authority, quite as it states, is defined by strength, decisiveness, and boldness. Work environments tend to be competitive, and people strive to gain personal advantage. People, or employees rather, are united by a strong control, and leaders emphasize confidence and dominance. Safety is defined by planning, caution, preparedness. To give you an example, I did some work recently with Sasol, the South African oil and energy company, and obviously there, as one would expect, when you go to the plants, it is all about safety, because if it's not, people could lose their lives. So work environments are predictable places where people are risk conscious and think things through carefully. People are united by a desire to feel protected. Order, on the other hand, is about respect, structure, and shared norms. Work environments are methodical places where people tend to play by the rules and want to fit in. Now, what I've seen over the years, and I think most people will support this, is that no organization is just any one of these. Most organizations have a dominant characteristic, but then there are others within it. The one thing to keep a note of is, however, if you, for example, have an organization that is purpose-focused and also caring, those tend to work together. If, on the other hand, it is about safety and learning, you are probably going to have a problem, because those tend to be direct opposites of each other, and one is going to eventually win out over the other. So you need to have an understanding of what is the right culture for your organization to make your strategy successful, to enable your strategy. And then you need to look at the organization and say, all right, where am I on this grid? Where do I fall? Are there subcultures? Are there cultures that are working against each other? And if there are, then you need to start looking at what to do to shape things to get them going in the right direction. Now, all of this talk of culture, and this is a very quick overview, but I want to give you some understanding of why it is so important. In my view, culture can be the difference between success and failure. Leaders are uniquely positioned to shape the culture needed for their organization. If you don't manage your culture, you can derail even the best well thought out strategy. So let's give some hard numbers, because everybody tends to put culture in the fluff category, but my argument is it actually impacts your bottom line. And so if we look at some statistics that have been gathered over time, likelihood of job turnover at an organization with high company culture is 13.9% versus 48% if culture is poor. Now, we mentioned that turnover can be good, and you invariably need a little bit, but you can't have half your organization turning over in a period of time, a single year. Because the reality is, every time someone leaves and you hire someone else, you're going to have to retrain them, get them time to adapt to the organization, to understand their role. You're going to lose time and money. Secondly, another study found that happy workers are 12% more productive than the average worker, and unhappy workers are 10% less productive. Now, unhappy and happy tends to be related to employee engagement. One thing that I do think is important to underline here is that employee engagement, you can have a very high score, and I've seen this, where people are in theory engaged and happy, but you're not performing as an organization. And what I've seen in that kind of situation is that there is an implicit culture that is working against what you are trying to achieve as a business. So even though your people may be happy and engaged, they are not necessarily putting their energy towards the kind of things that you want to achieve as an organization. And again, this is a more complicated topic that we don't have time for today, but happy to take questions over the coming weeks and have conversations with any of you that would like to learn more about this. And then finally, another statistic for you to look at is strong cultures outperform the competition by 20% and earn 1.2 to 1.7% more than their peers. So there is a direct impact on your bottom line. Now, when we look at culture and you want to shape your culture, let's look at what you have at your disposal to shape it. There are basically three categories of things that you have. Systems, so for example, how people are compensated, how people are evaluated. Symbols, example, do people always show up late for meetings? Do people change their meetings at the last minute? Or is it very methodical? Are people respected? Do people show up on time? Those are simple, very simple symbols, but they are something that set the tone for your organization. And then the behaviors. What kind of behaviors do you want? What kind do you have? And how do you get from A to B? So with that, let's remind ourselves of some of the myths and the reality that tend to be going around out there. I'm going to focus here on just a couple because we only have another few more minutes. But as I mentioned, it's about collective patterns, and culture is a critical business enabler. It is not a nice to have. On the other hand, there is no such thing as a good or bad culture. What's important is that the culture that you have has to fit the business strategy and vision of your organization. And it's every leader's role to fix, quote unquote, the culture, to set this culture that you want. It is not just HR. HR is simply one lever, one component that you have to do that. And as you look at culture, you have to live the values every day at every level. I've seen many organizations where leadership thinks that they are immune to this, that they can behave in a different way because they are a leader. Well, that undermines the entire organization. And a particular example, if you have a safety culture but leaders are not respecting that, it can cost lives. And I have seen this in some organizations. You need to understand that culture evolves over time. So you need to shape it and set the path for it. So looking ahead, what are we going to be talking about over the coming weeks and months? We're going to be really looking at some of the following examples. Some of the questions that I've looked at in my recent career with organizations is, I have good people, but our performance is average at best. Why? How do I change that? How do we create an organization that fits our purpose? We've gone through so much change, no one believes leadership anymore. This is a common one. You see it a lot. And what is our culture really? Fact versus fiction. How do I find out? How do I get under the skin of the organization? Or what's holding back our performance? So what I'd like to suggest is that you think about this, send in your suggestions or questions if there are any topics that are of special interest to you, or any problems or challenges that you have in your own organization that you would like to take to the next level. So tune in with us next time, and we will start exploring these details and practical examples and to help you identify how you can develop the right culture for you over time. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.